Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shepherd's Corner on the 12th of April 2018. I want to welcome everybody watching Shepherd's Corner, whether you're looking at us on any of the cable networks, and I know later tonight at 11:35 or 11:30 thereabouts, we will be on TV6. This will also be repeated on Sunday at around 10:30. So we want to welcome you to Shepherd's Corner. And my name is Deacon Walcott, and it's wonderful to have Archbishop Jason Gordon, who is all the way in Barbados. Welcome, Archbishop Jason.
Hi, Deacon Derek. Good to be with you.
You're
the
sure?
Technology of Trinity is so amazing, huh?
Technology is amazing. And Archbishop Jason is in Barbados. And tonight we're going to be dealing with the topic, the hot button topic, which is making the big news over the last couple of days. We're dealing with the buggery laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And today we had a landmark ruling. And the landmark ruling, you know, was passed today, saying that it was really, how you would put it, you know, it was unconstitutional and so on. And so they're going to further debate it sometime in July. But tonight, Archbishop Jason, you have in the Catholic news, you say, thinking with the church. Thinking with the church. Now, we have a lot of people outside there watching on, and they really want to know, what is the church's teaching with regards to this? And I know that somebody gave you a question. A question came immediately, and they said, tell me clearly the teaching of the church on the decriminalizing of buggery in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's kick this thing off straight to the point.
Well, I want to start by saying, Deacon, that it's important that we think with the church. And when we come to the hot topics, everybody wants to think on their own. And there are many people who think that they know better than the church. So, you know, it's one of the areas among many where I would advise you stay with the church. And if you can't get your heart to the teaching, then you stay with the church and you beg the Lord to show you what his teaching is on this. And you do more and more and more research until you understand what the church is actually teaching and why. You can't start by assuming the church to be wrong. That's why I title this one, Thinking with the Church. Because if you are assuming the church to be wrong, you are assuming yourself to be right, and that's arrogance. Because if you think that you have more access to truth than the church, that's just sheer arrogance. Jesus has promised us a couple of things with the church. Now, has the church always been right? No, but I would prefer to be wrong with the church than to be right on my own. Okay. Because I know that God will always guide the church to where the church needs to be. And if I stay with the church, I can't be wrong. Because ultimately, if I stay with the church, I will find my way. And there have been many loyal sons and daughters of the church who have challenged the church in her thinking that has allowed the church to grow and evolve. And that's another way of dealing with it. So let's jump into this area now. And I started my article up front by saying that Archbishop Joseph Harris, Bishop Gabriel Mazer, who is the Bishop of Dominica, and myself are now on public record saying that the criminalization of buggery is not in keeping with the church's teaching. Let me break that down in case people miss what I said.
Yeah, we need
that. The church does not believe that buggery should be criminalized in this time. And this is not a flippant teaching of the church. It's a teaching of the church that has come after a lot of reflection. The teaching was officially pronounced in the UN by the Archbishop, who is the church's representative to the UN. And it was put down there, although the church had disagreed with certain aspects of what the UN was proposing in terms of the gender categorization. The church made a very clear statement that buggery should not be criminalized, and that any country that has buggery as a criminal offense, that the church should find ways to remove it from the statute books. And there's good reason for it. And let me just say a little bit more about the teaching. That when this became a firestorm, as you could well imagine it would have been after the Archbishop in the UN made the statement, Father Lombardi, who is, at that stage, he was a official papal spokesman for Pope Benedict the 16th, came out and said, this is the teaching of the church, and he repeated the teaching again. So this is the teaching that the Secretary of State had to sign off on. This is the teaching that Pope Benedict had to sign off on. So Pope Benedict, the Secretary of State, and the representative of the church to the UN all signed off on this statement, and that's why it has become an official position of the Vatican, which you can find on the Vatican website. If you want to go and check it, is the 63rd session of the UN, and on the Vatican website you'll see the statement there in full.
But in your own article, Archbishop J, you say buggery is a serious moral offense. Now, if buggery is a serious moral offense, you know, how does the church then balance that position with regards to the law?
Well, so let's start with you know, in Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start.
Right.
So what does the church actually teach about human sexuality? The church teaches that the sexual act has two ends: for the unification of the spouses and the procreation and education of children. Now, any sexual act that is not open to both ends is an act that is not in keeping with the church's teaching. So it constitutes a sin or a grave sin. So no matter which act you start talking about now, whether you talk about pornography, masturbation, premarital sex, all of these are compromise acts because they don't fulfill the two ends. The premarital sex is unification. A child might be conceived, but this is not unification in a theological sense. This is a temporary bringing together of two bodies, not the unification of the spouses, which is what different in terms of what the church is asking for. And so when you understand the church's teaching, then when you come to buggery, then it clearly could unify, but it can't procreate. And therefore, it is an act that in itself is an immoral act. And the church's teaching is that it's a disordered act. Some would even say that, you know, fornication is a sin against God, buggery is a sin against nature. So there's no question in the church's mind or teaching that this is an act that is immoral, disordered. One would even say a sin against nature, because it is a sin against the design of the human being. That God created us male and female, and in our bodies there is a design that has theology invested into it. In the complementarity of the male and the female is where you start to see the image of God. And so in all of these ways, the image of God is male and female coming together in complementarity. So in all of these, for all of these great reasons, the buggery or the homosexual act is a disordered act, is a frustrated act. It is an act that is not in keeping with the intention of God for human sexuality. And so we're not arguing for a moment that homosexuality is okay now. No, we are arguing that homosexuality is immoral, but that doesn't mean it should be illegal, and that these might be two separate categories that we have to talk about.
Well, let's look at this, because people listening now, you know, after the firestorm, and I like that word you use, you know, because it has been a firestorm dividing the people over the last couple of days in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
Right? And for many, it will not be easy to hear or accept. And so, if it's not easy to hear and accept, I know you're saying, let's go with the church, you know.
Yeah.
that presents a big struggle, because let's go now with the church. This has been part of our laws, and we go back, based on your article, all into the 16th century, 15 something, where it was part of the laws of the United Kingdom. We are a colony of the, we were a colony of the United Kingdom.
Let me talk to that.
Yes.
The buggery laws began in the 1500s, and they were enacted at the same time as the Protestant Reformation, practically, and they were enacted by Cromwell. And they were used against the church and against other institutions where the state wanted to confiscate land and property. They would accuse people of buggery and therefore confiscate. And the laws said that not only was the person, was it a capital offense? That means that the person was put to death, but also all assets of the person was confiscated. That's how it began in the 1500s. Before that, it was not seen that way. Now, once you get past that, you then have to understand that buggery in terms of the British state then went through a big reformation, the laws in the 1800s, where it was reduced, the scope of it was reduced. In the first instance, it had everything to do with what would have been considered unnatural sex. That would be anything other than vaginal sex. And the law was so graphic that anyone who was caught or was accused and convicted of any other form of sexual play or intercourse or whatever it was would have been not only put to death, their lands confiscated. So in the 1800s now, they reduced the scope of it and they brought it down to anal sex between two men or a man and a woman. And there they reduced the scope significantly. And then after that, it has been struck off or repealed from the books in England. So even the laws have had its own long gestation and being transformed from one state to the next state to the next state. So that we now have laws that had been in the books on England that are no longer there. And that's how laws are. Laws are evolving according to society, societal norms, according to how people in society see things. Laws are evolving. So the church's position is not claiming for a moment that buggery is okay. It is saying it is not okay. But that doesn't mean that it should be, that doesn't say that it should be put down in the same way.
Okay.
So now, go ahead.
Okay, so you're saying that it should not be put down in the same way, all right? But, yeah, you know, having people, I mean, and we're looking at all the churches now. We see that on the steps of the Hall of Justice, we even had the Muslims there. They gave their take on it. The Protestants were there, you know, the Pentecostals were there, and so on. And they're saying, well, okay, this is a moral law, and buggery was in part of the legal law. So why change it? Because we'll be opening up the gates to even, you know, to homosexuality. Well, and letting that then be, you know what I mean, gay marriage and so on.
Well, so the real claim is that it's a strategy that they will go after the buggery laws first, and then after that they will then go after gay marriage or same-sex marriage after. And that is so, and we've seen it in country after country. But there's something about the dignity of the human person, and there's something about how do we treat a human person who is in error. And is not every person who is in error deserves a capital punishment. So the church's teaching on this really revolves around two stories. The Annunciation and the woman caught in the very act of committing adultery. Joseph, when he learned that Mary was pregnant, could have denounced her publicly. Joseph decided not to denounce her publicly, but to do so informally. And if he had decided to denounce her publicly, she would have been tried for adultery and stoned to death.
Right.
So we have Mary herself could have been subject to the law, the full weight of the law.
Right.
Capital punishment based on her being pregnant for someone other than Joseph.
Right.
Don't mind that other is God. Don't mind that. But that we have to recognize. And why does Joseph choose not to have her put to death? That's a real question. Being a man of integrity, Joseph chose to divorce her informally. In other words, Joseph chose to circumvent the law and act with mercy. Are you understanding this?
I'm understanding this. Yeah. So therefore he treated the situation with mercy. Yes.
If he had chosen justice, Mary would have been put to death.
Right.
He chose mercy. He circumvented the law, choosing to divorce her informally. Okay. The second one is more to the point, where you have the woman who was caught in the very act of committing adultery.
Right.
Now, you can't get more graphic than this.
Right.
Now, nowhere in that text does Jesus condemn this woman. He simply says to the crowd, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And he goes and he writes in the sand. One commentator says, this is the only time you see Jesus writing.
Yeah.
And the last time you see God writing, it was the 10 Commandments he was writing. And in that sense, this commentator believes that Jesus was writing the new law. And the new law is Hesed, mercy. And he was writing the new law for Israel because the old law was being superseded. And what's interesting is that at the end of it, when everybody's walked away, whatever he wrote, he says to the woman, where are they who condemn you? No one does, sir. Okay, well, neither do I condemn you. Go now and sin no more. Now, this is a profound text. He doesn't wait until the woman has made a firm act of contrition, firm purpose of amendment, and change her life completely, and then say, okay, well, maybe I could consider giving you a little blind. He gives her forgiveness, and then from the forgiveness says, go and sin no more. But what's important is that Jesus could have had her put to death by stoning. He could have invoked the law, but he doesn't invoke the law. And this is the trap that they were putting to him. And you have to understand, Jesus was teaching about mercy so completely, so profoundly, in every opportunity, that's why this is a trap. It's a trap because it's saying, you know, Jesus, you've been talking to us about mercy all the time. But how do you get around the law when the law asks you to stone this woman? So what are you going to choose? Are you going to obey the law, or are you going to keep to your fancy teaching on mercy? That's really what the test was. The test was about Jesus' teaching on mercy. That's the test. And that's what was put into the balance. And what does Jesus do? He doesn't do anything that would compromise his teaching on mercy. He lets them walk away by challenging them first. Now that's a big, big swallow. But here we have two cases in the Bible where the person, according to the law, deserved the full brunt of the law, which was capital punishment, being put to death, being stoned to death, let me put it bluntly. And in both cases, Joseph in the first case and Jesus in the second case, does not invoke the law and the penalty of the law, but in fact invokes mercy and does not allow the person to be stoned to death.
Okay. I want to throw this out to you, and I know the viewing public will also be listening. If I were to ask you, a homosexual act and somebody being caught in adultery, a heterosexual act, in the eyes of the church, they're both wrong. They're both morally wrong. Correct?
Correct.
Now, society has evolved in this way, that in Jesus' time, somebody caught in adultery or somebody betrothed to a man, well, it's the same adultery, and they would be stoned to death.
Yes.
Here we have a homosexual act.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we now don't stone people to death or kill them if they're caught in adultery.
Right.
So what you're saying is the church is looking at, okay, let me ask the question. Is buggery a worse sin than being caught in adultery in the eyes of the church?
So you can look at this from three perspectives. Okay? From one perspective, sin is sin.
All right.
Okay. But we do talk of gradations of sin.
Yeah.
Both are mortal sin.
Okay. And a mortal sin will take you to hell.
Adultery
are
against the 10 Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
So both are mortal sin.
Mm-hmm.
Both acts completely compromise the soul and stop the soul from being connected with God.
Right.
Both are.
Both are.
So, but we would then go on to say, but okay, but buggery is a sin against nature.
Yeah.
Fornication is a sin against God. So it's a different level of sin, we would say. But the fact is, both of these are mortal sins. Both of these are a grave matter, and both of these acts constitutes an undoing of society.
All right. Good.
Because if we allow, so, you know, if you want to do capital punishment for sexual sins, well, you know, what about thoughts?
Yeah.
Let's get some thought police out there and start to lock up people, you know? We are laughing for. You only study how many years they get in.
Good viewers.
You're speechless.
Totally speechless. Because, you see, I'm looking at it, you know, that we've dropped the stoning for adultery.
Not we. Jesus and Joseph have. This is the point here.
Okay,
both Jesus and Joseph have.
But Jesus and Joseph have, but right now on nobody's books, no laws in as far as I know. I could probably be wrong as far as
you're
maybe
wrong. Because if you're in an Islamic country, they will still stone for
in a Muslim law or in a Jewish law?
Under Sharia
law. Well, I was going there. Yeah. But in different societies, it's no longer what we would call, you will no longer suffer capital punishment for adultery.
No.
Okay. But let's go now to this buggery law. Now, what we are seeing, it is based on the books. If caught, 25 years or something like that. I can't remember the exact thing. Okay.
Correct.
So the church's position is saying it's wrong morally, but
yes,
we should remove.
It's a mortal sin.
It's a mortal sin.
Morally, it is a mortal sin.
Right.
It is part of the degrading of society and the corruption of society. But that does not mean that the person should be put into prison.
Okay. But good night, viewers. This is a hot button topic. I know that I've been getting WhatsApps since we started, and I know that the viewing public would like to call in now and speak to the Archbishop and share how you're feeling, you know, over the last couple of days. You're listening to the church. The Archbishop is saying, we want you to think with the church. So we have opened the lines. Would you please call, if you may, if you want to, and share your views on this topic, and, you know, ask him any questions that you may. I would like to kick off with a WhatsApp question which came in.
Sure.
So it says, well, some may say then, why protest gay marriage, the Gay Marriage Law Act, the Gay Marriage Law then?
Mm-hmm.
If we're saying remove this, you know.
Yeah. So, you know, Deacon, I'm going to write on that next week.
Right.
Because the question that came to me immediately was, But then why not allow pedophilia and gay marriage? Why do we have laws against pedophilia, and why are we allowing for gay marriage? So pedophilia is a minor with an adult. And so this is not two consenting adults, two totally different things. And the Child Protection Act is what that comes under. That's not under burglary. So even if the burglary law is struck off, pedophilia will always be a crime against the state. Because what is involved here is the corruption of a minor. That's so different from two consenting adults choosing to do what we would consider mortal sin. So the pedophilia argument was the first one that came to me after this whole thing, this firestorm started. And the marriage, the same-sex marriage, was the second challenge that came. And I would prefer to in the cool of my head and study, to write a response to that, and deal with that in my next column.
Okay. I have a WhatsApp saying, "Good evening. I understand the analogy with the Annunciation. However, knowing that this is the first legal steps to gay marriage and the floodgates of spiritual demise, it opens to an entire society, the floodgates, to demise an entire society. Is it really worth the risk?" Now, I say that you're going to be thinking about that, to write something on that next week. But just to give you food for thought, are we open?
That is a great question.
Yes.
And I think it's a very important question. Do you put somebody's rights ahead of strategy? Or do you put strategy ahead of somebody's rights? We're weighing things that are not equal. And the dignity of the human person and the strategy somebody has chosen to use to get their way in society, these are difficult things to weigh. But I would give that some consideration in my next week's column, because it's a very important one.
Yes. We have a next one, and this is coming from La Divina Pastora in Separia. They're saying, so how come robbery, murder, rape, etc. are serious sins, mortal sins? Why then should they too not be taken off the law books?
That's a great question.
Separia, we got you. That's from Separia.
That's a great question. But in each of those cases, you have a grave injustice done against another person in society. In the homosexual act, if it's two consenting adults, an injustice is not done against another member of society. It is done against God.
Okay, we have a call, Archbishop J. Good evening. Welcome to Shepherd's Corner.
Good evening.
Hello?
Yes, good evening.
Hello, yes, good night.
Good night.
Yes. Your Grace?
Yes, welcome.
Deacon Walcott, thank you very much. For those who try to study this thing and wonder whether it's right or wrong, should we not refer them to the Word of God? Thou art Peter. And the rest of it. And the next one is, my church, what you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. These are all very basic. For those who want to argue, and they will continue arguing and discussing until they're dead, and nothing will become of it, where they're concerned at least. Should we not go back, basically? And whose sins you forgive, they are forgiven, and the beauty of repentance and forgiveness and stuff like that. Thank you very, very much, Your Grace. Thank you very much, Deacon Walcott.
You're most welcome.
Okay, God bless. That was interesting.
That's an interesting one.
So basically, he's echoing my point, thinking with the church.
Yes.
If Jesus entrusted to Peter the keys of the kingdom, and I think everybody would agree that Pope Benedict was one of the brightest theologian popes that we've had since Gregory the Great.
Yes.
This Pope Benedict is an amazingly bright theologian pope who really thought through the faith in deep and profound ways. And this teaching comes out under Pope Benedict.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not just a fly-by-night teaching. This comes out under Benedict, and it is his spokesperson who defends the church and the teaching, which says to me that it is not a teaching that Pope Benedict, that was removed from Pope Benedict, or that Pope Benedict did not endorse. Father Lombardi, as the papal spokesperson, could not have endorsed and backed up the statement unless he had checked with Pope Benedict, who he represents personally.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I'm saying this is not a fly-by-night teaching of the church. There are other things that some cardinal or some bishop or some priest might say that is not central to the magisterial teaching.
Yeah.
We can't say that about this teaching because it was an official teaching to the UN, and because the official spokesperson of the church came out teaching it.
All right. Now, I have some WhatsApps, and we also have a call. Good evening.
Hello, good evening, Archbishop.
Good evening. How are you doing?
I'm not hearing good.
Hi, we're hearing you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I am just referring. I was very well. I got the Catholic News today, and I saw the article "Thinking with the Church," and I heard what the Archbishop had to say. My only one of my only. First of all, I consider myself to be a person who totally, whatever the magisterium teaches, I will try to reason. I accept it, okay? And then I try to reason. I see that the Archbishop said that buggery is immoral but not illegal. And I have read the article, and I've heard what he had said, and I don't think he has sufficiently given us the reason why you would say it's immoral, but it should not be illegal. On what basis that should be so? I think it's unfair to say that this is sort of about thinking with the church, because the church says, as you said, it is a grave moral evil. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are some sins that are graver than others. Adultery cannot in no way be put on par, heterosexual adultery with homosexual acts and bestiality. Surely we can see those are graver sins, right? And that's what the church teaches. We don't teach sin is sin. That is an evangelical sort of thinking. I am thinking with the church, and I was kind of offended when I saw the picture used with the stone in the hand, because this is surely an area open for discussion, and I think that sends the message that somehow I am being sort of judgmental, which I am not. I totally love and I'm open to journey with all people with same-sex attraction. I have children. I have tried to explain the issue to them, right? And I think that we need to stop making people feel badly about it. And I think there's need for clearly more discussion, because you haven't said how it could be immoral and on what basis. The most I could see is when you said, I'll try to finish quickly. The most I said is you have a problem with the punishment. And I can understand as a capital punishment, if a penalty is too heavy, it could make the whole thing unjust. So are we talking about maybe a more just penalty, or how do we decide then what should be illegal and what should be not? Based on that, we probably should open the jail if we're talking about mercy. I mean, there's so many ways in which people, sin. How do you decide what should be illegal and what should not be illegal? This is something that really needs to be thrashed out, and I don't think it should be put under the heading of thinking with the church, because I am totally in line. I agree. Same-sex attraction is different from actually deciding to be part of a homosexual act. And that's how I explain to my children. We have compassion, we love, we respect the person with same-sex attraction, but we have to journey with them. We have to tell them about the grace of God. Yes, it's something different if you fall. If you know something is wrong and you try to live a certain way, you make a mistake, you get up, you try again. But you can't say it's not wrong, and you can't say, and the law guides people's idea of what is right and what is wrong, and it guides behaviors. And I will stop here. But I think I've said enough, and I think, though, that we should stop saying that people who reason is not trying to reason this out, somehow thinking against the church.
Okay.
I thank you, Archbishop, for the time, and I think this needs people, we need to have more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. But you said a lot of different things that contradicted yourself at times. If you're thinking with the church, then I would say to you, do the Google for the on this matter. If you went to Google and you looked at the 63rd UN intervention of the Holy See, you will see it there, and you'll see Father Lombardi's statements. The statement says, so it's an intervention at the 63rd session of the UN of the United Nations, December 18, 2008. The Church puts forward its official teaching. The Holy See continues to advocate that every sign of unjust discrimination towards homosexual persons should be avoided and urges states to do away with criminal penalties against them. That's not my teaching, okay? So let's start there. It's not Jason Gordon who is saying that I think, we shouldn't have laws against buggery. It is the church at the highest level that has put forth this teaching. And that's why the title of this is Thinking with the Church. Now, I will tell you, personally, it took me a lot to come to this and to be able to get my head, my heart, and my mind around it. Because like most people in the Caribbean, I saw that, the thing should be both an immoral act and a criminal act. And for a long time, that's how I would have seen it. When I came across the church's teaching, and then I wrestled with it, and I wrestled with it more and more and more, then I realized, okay, the church is teaching this, and she has a reason for teaching this. What is her teaching? So Father Lombardi goes on to say, and in a clarification, he says, every person has an innate human dignity and cannot be taken away, and that cannot be taken away, and added, most Catholics and indeed most Catholic teachings tell us that all people are entitled to live with the basic human dignity without the threat of violence. And imprisonment is a form of violence for an act that is primarily a personal act. Even if the act is disordered, even if the act is immoral, it is still a personal act. It would be like if we decided to put, okay, 25 years for buggery, and maybe we should give 1 year for masturbation, and 3 years for pornography, and 6 months for bad thoughts. These are personal acts, and so in the thinking of the church, it is because these are personal acts that have to do with consenting human beings that are adults, that they shouldn't constitute a legal act. Robbery is a different act. It's not a personal act. I am stealing from you. That's different. Murder is a different. I am taking your life. That's not a personal act. That's a public act and a public violation against another human being. So they're very different forms of acts, and that's why I said, you can start with the position by saying sin is sin, but the church has gradations between mortal and venial. And in the case of buggery, the church teaches that this is not just a sin, this is a depraved act, but still it is a personal act. And because it is a personal act, the church believes that it does not deserve to have a legal penalty associated with it. Difficult teaching, I say so in my column. And if you read the column, you'll see I would say that this is not going to be an easy teaching for many people to accept. Yeah. And I can't tell you that I came to it by skipping and jumping. I had to wrestle deeply with it to put my mind to it, to really come to it.
Okay. We've got another call, but we also have a WhatsApp. This person WhatsApping saying, good afternoon or good evening. Not that the law should uphold morals, but when it does, it may upkeep standards of good morals of the society in which it exists. Therefore, removal of such laws may negatively impact society. What are your thoughts?
Well, then let's put back the laws against adultery. Let's reimpose those laws on our society. Certainly we have a serious problem with adultery in our country.
Yes.
A really serious problem. And if you want to test an idea, take it to its logical conclusion on both sides.
Yes.
And then you see whether the idea holds or doesn't hold. Well, there's nobody that I know of who would want to impose capital punishment for adultery anymore. Well, why? The question is why? Why do we think that that's not illegal? Because all the arguments are the same arguments. All the arguments are the same. That by taking away the legal penalty for adultery, you're allowing adultery to become more normal in society, and you're giving bad example to people. Well, yes, we know all of that.
Okay.
But we also know that the human person deserves a certain kind of respect.
Okay. We have another call. Good evening. Good evening, caller. Thank you for holding.
Hello, good evening to you.
Good
Your
evening.
Grace and,
Welcome.
I'm Deacon Derek. Your Grace, I support you fully that we should listen to the Church and the Pope. I always tell the 7 Days people when I'm engage them in Scripture that I believe in the Pope over the Bible. If the Bible says something and the Pope says something that seems contradictory, I'll obey the Pope, because the Bible tells us do not lean on your own understanding. And I like that traffic police and the traffic regulations good for normal time. But when we have a crisis like we have now with buggery and adultery and all these things, we need to listen to the Pope. Now I have some questions, a comment, and a quick question about the buggery. Okay. Now we are told in the book of Romans that all that law does is to tell us what is sinful. Yeah. What I like to tell you to tell me is, does it refer to the law of God or the law of the land? Also, we are told in Scripture, when you know what is the right thing to do and you don't do it, that is a sin. And the authorities are there to serve God. They carry out God's revenge by punishing wrongdoers. But supposing neither the people who want the buggery law changed and the authorities, neither of them know that it is a sin. So they don't know what's the right thing to do. Does that mean that it is not a sin for them? That it is right because they don't know that it is a sin?
Well, you know,
I'll put down and listen, okay?
That's a very important question. Mortal sin requires three things. It must be grave matter, it must be full knowledge, and full consent. So, is buggery grave matter? Yes, it is. And there's no question about it. It is grave matter. Is it full knowledge? If somebody genuinely doesn't understand that it is wrong and genuinely doesn't believe it is wrong, can they commit a mortal sin? Well, no, because it requires full knowledge. And it also requires full consent. So if somebody was raped, would that be a mortal sin? No, that's not a mortal sin because you didn't give your consent. The fact that it is rape meant that you didn't give your consent. Therefore, you have not committed a mortal sin. So it's not, the sin is not in the act itself. The sin is in the act, but also in the disposition of the sinner to the act. And so the act itself is a grave matter. We can't argue against that, no matter how you look at it. It is grave matter. It is taking society in the wrong direction. It is completely opposite to the design that God has given to us. It is against the theology of the body, as John Paul would teach us. So it is grave matter. And this must never be undermined or lessened or washed away. And so people who are thinking that, well, if the church is saying it is not to be criminalized, they're saying that it's okay. No, that's a fallacy. Because what the church is saying is it is grave moral matter. But that should not constitute a criminal offense.
I have a Facebook question here.
Go ahead.
What is the church's position on a gay couple who chooses to live out a chaste relationship?
That is exactly the church's position and the church's recommendation. So if you went on in my article, you would have seen under the church's teaching where I talked about what does the Catechism of the Catholic Church teach, and you could look it up for yourself. CCC 2357 to 2359. There are several important points. The homosexual act is intrinsically disordered because it is close to life, which is what I said earlier. Right. That's the reason why contraception is wrong. The second point is the homosexuals should be protected, and we should ensure that they're not subject to discrimination or violence. This is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. The homosexual person is counseled to unite their sacrifice with that of Christ, living a life of chastity, mastery, and the inner freedom as a way of Christian perfection. Now, I once listened to a podcast of two Catholics whose orientation was same-sex attraction, and had struggled deeply with this. And one of them said, as deeply as I've struggled with this, I have come to the place where this guy says, I believe God called me to chastity. That I knew when I did a sexual act, I knew it was wrong. And himself and his partner made a decision to live a chaste life. And so they live like brothers in the house. And in that sense, they joined their suffering to the suffering of Christ. They lived as the Catechism of the Church encourages them and counsels them to live. And in that sense, they have, in the midst of this real difficult struggle that they have managed to live a life of virtue. And that's what the church is counseling.
Okay. We have 59 questions on WhatsApp, and I have a call. We'll take the call. Good evening. Welcome to Shepherd's Corner.
Good evening, Your Grace. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And happy Easter.
Thank you.
Belated Easter greetings. Your Grace, Elias here. I am not going to tell you what you have to do, but I can share some of my thoughts, particularly as I feel strongly about this thing. As a lay person, I think it's prudential area, and that's not coming out. It should come out because it will put people at ease. They have to use their prudence. I also think our Lord said he didn't come to abolish the law. He did not abolish the law against adultery. He put up the ante for marriage, so to speak. And Joseph didn't abolish laws. So I think, there's room here to be a little more careful about the things that are being said. And as a layperson, I think prudentially it's a wrong move. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. And in every matter like this, and it becomes a matter of conscience, all I can do is tell you what the church thinks. And all I could do is invite you, which is what I do at the end of my article. I said, moral issues are not a matter of emotion. It's not what I feel or feel passionately. It is a matter of reasoning from biblical principles and from the church's magisterium and teaching. I know a major objection that repealing the Buggery law will open the door to same-sex marriage. These may well be strategies that are tied together. We need to deal with them separately. We need to oppose same-sex marriage in every way possible. That's a different issue. We need to reflect on our feelings about this matter, and we need to ask ourselves, why do we feel as strongly as we're feeling? Is our feeling and our strong feelings because of our conviction of Christ, or is it because of societal prejudice that we've grown up with? And those are hard to separate out. really, really tough ones. Is this a matter of sin or well, what I would say is it is a matter of moral reasoning where each one of us has to come to the place where we can come to docility to the church. And I am saying to you that in my own journey, this was not my first position, nor did it seem to me the logical position to come to, nor did it seem to me as the position I would want to espouse, to hold, or to put forward to society. For a lot of good reasons that people have expressed.
Yes.
But it is not about my thinking, and it's not about what I want. It's about the church's thinking, and it's about us reasoning together to come to what Christ is asking us as a church in Trinidad and Tobago in this century. And that's my invitation to people.
All right. We have another call, and we have 62 WhatsApp messages. So we're going to take the call, but this is definitely a conversation that we have to continue. Because based on the
response... I'm in Rome next week.
You're in Rome next week?
Yeah.
You're roaming.
I don't think I could do the conversation roaming.
He's roaming. Good evening. Welcome, caller.
Good evening, Archbishop Jason. Good evening, Deacon D. Central in the house.
Central in the house.
Central.
Well, Your Grace, I know you wouldn't take it for granted, the fissure that this has caused in the local church. It has.
I know.
There are really good, devoted, Jesus-loving Catholic brothers and sisters that feel deeply hurt too. That the church, one, has taken, it seemed, a while to give its position, and two, that the church, and I think it comes from the position where many times we know it, that the church is sometimes afraid to call sin, sin. And therefore, many see it as the church once again, kind of shine away from calling something that is wrong, wrong. But, so I'm just glad that you understand, and I think we need to give it some more time to and some more conversation, and I want to encourage you to end the program in exactly how you started off, in saying that our position, even though we struggle and beat up with it, should be the position of the church, because Mother Church knows best, even when we don't understand, right? The second thing that was interesting to me in Paul's letter in 1 Corinthians, where he lists out neither the sexually immoral, idolaters, adulterers, nor men that practice homosexuality. Homosexuality is not even the first one he listed as to say the grave one. It's in the middle, and I think greed and drunkenness comes after that as well, It kind of, that for me lent me to the position of these are sins, these are immoral acts, but again, we must understand the person, and, well, let me just say, I am there with the church. Struggle like you, but I'm there with Mother Church, and I will be schooled by her, and pray for the grace to accept. You all have a wonderful night. Deacon D, we had a talk.
We'll talk. We have,
okay, Central.
We have 4 minutes, 42 seconds, but I have to take this one. It says, good evening, Your Grace. Question in terms of this law of rights and marriage. Will priests be authorized to marry these persons in the event of gay marriage, or be willing to face the consequences of the law, if so?
I think that's a mute question. We do not accept any form of union between people of the same sex as marriage.
Okay.
So I think that's a mute question. And we will be able to separate the covenant, which is the relationship with God, from the law, which is the state function. In Belgium, they separate marriage into 2 acts. One act that happens legally in the civil authorities, and the second act that happens in the church. And we'll have to go to that if it comes to that. But let us pray we don't get to that in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay.
And if anybody is wondering, the church is completely against same-sex marriage.
Okay. Question. What was the church's position prior to 2008, and what circumstances led them to this position at the UN? In essence, what situations did the Pope consider to say that buggery laws were against human dignity?
You know, somewhere in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, John Paul himself had a big change in his heart on these matters. So it started with capital punishment, which was well established and accepted by everyone. And John Paul changed his position on it, and with that changed the church's position on capital punishment, saying, you know, I hear you, I understand why we would think that the person should be put to death, but at the end of the day, this is state-sponsored murder. And at the end of the day, this does not constitute a moral good. The taking of life will always be a moral evil. And so John Paul wrestled with it, as Pope Benedict wrestled with it with John Paul, because he was the head of the Congregation for Doctrine and Faith. And when Pope Benedict becomes Pope, he wrestles with it again and again and again. And so we have both Pope John Paul and Pope Benedict wrestling with these matters of the connection between morality and legality, and where do they lie. Now, people I know will say, well, then why are we making a fuss about abortion? That's different, because it's not a private act. Abortion has to do with the taking of the life of another. We believe it to be murder, and in that sense, we believe it to be a violation of the rights of another person. And so my rights cannot violate your rights. Whenever my rights violate your rights, that's when we have problems in society. And so that's the difference between the homosexual act. Nobody's rights are being violated, although we believe this to be an intrinsically moral act, immoral act. Whereas if you deal with murder, if you deal with robbery, all the other acts are a violation of the rights of somebody else.
Okay. Now we got 1 minute, 2 seconds. Your conclusion.
My conclusion is this. I didn't start from this position. This was not where I started 5-10 years ago. This is a position I have come to because of the church's position and because of the church's teaching. And as I follow the church's teaching, and as I listened to Father Lombardi's explanation of this, it really led me to see why the church is teaching what she's teaching, that although homosexuality is considered an immoral act, we do not believe it should be an illegal act. And we frown on anyone who would treat the homosexual with contempt, with violence, with any form of discrimination, because that means that we're not treating them like a human being and like a person of God. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Come journey through the corridors of life, creating an environment of love and spiritual growth. Trinity TV, that you may have